It's great to be talking to you, Eric Hardmeyer, our hero. And it was a great presentation. Thanks, everybody. If an agency needs liquidity, you provide it. What interest rate is that? And is that a loan? Or, what are the terms for that
Sure.
sort of loan?
So it would be really what we use as an index for state agencies is we use the Fed rate. Today that's 1/4%, and we mark it up some to meet our overhead costs. So state agencies borrow at a rate from us somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.25% to 1.5%. I should say that not only do we provide a low interest rate to state agencies, but one of the other things that we do is we are and have been in the student loan business. We believe that education is a important part of the evolution of the state of North Dakota, the economic development of the state of North Dakota. And so we have provided student loans to our residents, since the early 60s. In fact, we were the first bank to make a federally insured student loan in the nation. And today, you've heard of SoFi. The Bank of North Dakota actually was the first to offer a total student loan refinance program. And today we lend money to student loan borrowers at a rate of 1.75%.
Wow.
Yeah, and so they have options of fixed or variable rate. So the nature of the bank, its low cost of money, is something that we do utilize to encourage economic activity, and we do provide that to our borrowers as well. We just simply take our cost, add something for overhead and profit, and get the money out as inexpensively as we can.
And where do you get the liquidity? Do you get it from the Fed? Do you get it from the Federal Home Loan Bank, or you just got it there in your deposit base?
Well, today, along with a lot of other banks across the country, banks today seem to be flush with deposits. But as I said, our nucleus of our deposit, our core deposits, come from state tax collections, income tax, sales tax, fees. But we do, as I said, have access to the Federal Home Loan Bank, the Federal Reserve. Our banks today are flush with liquidity, so they are selling us their excess liquidity. We have $1 billion of deposits from other banks on our books today.
Well, thank you so much, President Hardmeyer. I just wanted, as we're looking to pass the legislation in New York State to really enact public banks on state and municipal levels, I wanted to give the opportunity for the electeds that we have on the call to ask you some questions, since you know how to get it done. I have State Senator Jabari Brisport.
Eric, thank you so much, by the way. Fascinating that you took the time to be with us over here in New York. But I guess I'm curious how, if any, interaction the Bank of North Dakota has with private banks that exist, what the competition is between you, and how you navigate that.
Yeah, that's the critical part of our success is, when you think about the bank and its 100-year history, I would say that, we were maybe one of the originators of the triple P model, the private-public partnership. So our whole model is built on partnering with banks, not competing with them. So the economic development loan programs that we have are all done in participation with a local bank. So the local banks originate the loan, service the loan, and sell a portion to us. And typically what we will do then is, we will reduce their risk into any one venture, allowing them to leverage that relationship, make more loans available. It allows that bank to operate at a size and capacity of the Bank of North Dakota. Some of them may have a legal lending limit of, $1 million, but because they are participating with us, they can access our full lending capacity which on a bite-sized transaction would be in excess of 150 million. So we think of the banks as our partners, and they are our delivery channel of our programs and not our competitor. And I think if you look at, one of the 2 or 3 hallmarks of what has made BND successful, it is that model. It is the fact that we're not going to compete, for their customer. That's their customer. They have the relationship. They know them. We have no interest, no desire to have a direct relationship with that borrower, and think it would be counterproductive towards, the model. And, if we ever get backlash, it's because we may have entered into an area that does, compete with the private sector. A few years ago, we entered into the mortgage space. After 2008, 2009, there were underserved areas of the state where they just simply could not get a mortgage. So BND went to the legislature with the backing of our trade institutions and said, you know what, this is an area where the Bank of North Dakota can play. We can make mortgage services available in rural parts of the state that just simply don't have access to the market. So they now are able to get a home mortgage loan at the same rates of anybody else in any other community, using the Bank of North Dakota as the originator in that case. But we did it, with the full backing of the banking association. So it's a very mindful strategy to work with the banks and not compete against them.
Well, thank you for joining us. We also have Assemblyman Victor Pichardo, who is chair of the New York State Committee on Banks. So he'll be a lead in really getting this forward. So I wanted to give the Assemblyman an opportunity to ask any questions that he may have.
Mr. Hardmeyer, really appreciate it. What we're seeing in our communities is that the traditional private banks are leaving, and they don't have a footprint in our communities anymore. For example, my district, who I represent about 125,000 people in the legislature. We have effectively maybe one bank in a 3-mile radius. So I know the Bank of North Dakota, do you sort of have that traditional banking model, having a footprint? People do their normal banking transactions with you, and is there a model either similar, either with that you know of or within North Dakota, that does that kind of stuff to sort of either create the space that maybe a credit union for whatever reason can't keep up with, or that the private sector has sort of just simply threw their hands up in the air and abandoned?
Well, yeah, so that's a really good question. So as we've thought about the bank, you've heard me describe our economic development efforts, but what we really are not is the retail bank, and I think that's what you're talking about. So you can't come to the Bank of North Dakota, for example, for a car loan or a boat loan, or a personal loan of any kind, other than a student loan. So we've set that aside and said, the private sector for the most part is handling that. We are just really interested in, what are the gaps that we can fill, and certainly business startup is a huge area of interest for the state of North Dakota. We are, primarily an energy and ag state, and we go through the flows of commodity prices, and it's feast or famine in North Dakota. And so what we have recognized for literally decades is that we need to diversify North Dakota's economy. We need to have programs that help entrepreneurs start up businesses, because that's the lifeblood, and that's what I hear you talking about in New York as well. It is really the opportunity for entrepreneurs to get access to funding. And not only do we run, our own, loan programs, but we also have a venture capital arm where we have the ability to make, equity investments into businesses as well. And we're mindful that we're not investing into a company directly and turning around and lending to, a company that we bought an ownership interest in. So, it's an interesting model that we run. And I'm sure, as I've mentioned, every state, if they choose to go down this path, will have something unique for their state. What is it that you're trying to solve? If you start with that idea first, what are the problems? What are the gaps? What are you trying to solve, rather than trying to be everything for everybody? I think that gets you where you need to be. And the biggest pushback that I've always seen is the pushback from the trade associations, from the banking communities are afraid of unfair competition. And so we've really structured the bank in a way to eliminate or diminish as much as possible that opportunity to compete with the private sector, but rather to help them meet their needs.
President Hardmeyer, that was very informative. I'm going to turn it over to Bob Master, who is the Legislative and Political Director for Communication Workers of America, District 1. And Bob will be able to tell us why a public bank can really support unions and the labor movement and help the working men and women of the state.
Thank you very much, Senator Sanders, and thank you, Assemblyman Pichardo and Senator Bridgeport. I guess he's gone, but I want to thank him as well. And I also want to acknowledge that those were terrific presentations, a really compelling case that all of our presenters have made about the benefits of a public bank and what it could bring for the people of New York. I mean, the truth is, the reason that the labor movement should be for a public bank, and the reason that CWA, my union, the Communications Workers of America, and our 65,000 members in New York State are for a public bank is because of all of the benefits that folks have described here that will roll down to working people across this state. Starting with, for example, the idea that I think at some point somebody said our state would have saved $6.5 billion in fees if we had a public bank and were using a public bank to process payroll and things like that. That's $6.5 billion that can go to our schools, to our payrolls, to our hospitals, which are all suffering. We have a gigantic budget deficit, and we are facing a real crisis in the state right now. That kind of economic, fiscal responsibility is what we need. Our children who need loans to go to college, to be able to get a loan at 1% or 1.5%, as opposed to 6 or 7% or whatever the federal loan programs are talking about. It's a tremendous benefit for all of the working people. And so I would, I think that the speakers have made a very, very, a kind of an irresistible case, as far as I can tell, for the kind of unmitigated benefits of redirecting so much of our resources. Our state has, President Hardmeyer may be taken aback by this. Our state has a budget of $170 billion a year. It's a phenomenal amount of money. And those resources put to work differently as, loans for small businesses, as loans for our students and so on, can only benefit the working people of this state. I think it was very interesting at the beginning of his presentation where he talked about kind of the historical origins of the bank, and the origins of the North Dakota Bank in an era of progressive ferment, when there was a general uprising among working people and a populist demand to make the institutions of our government serve the public. That's what the labor movement is all about. The labor movement is about curtailing the uncontrolled power of corporations and big capital, and trying to put more power in the hands of regular people. And this is, a very obvious and very important way of trying to do that. So we're wholeheartedly for a public bank. We think it's going to be a big fight. I think, I'm sure President Hardmeyer would acknowledge that you try to start a public bank 150 miles away from Wall Street, it's a bigger fight than if you're 2,500 miles away from Wall Street. So we have our work cut out for us, but we're in for the fight.
Well, thank you, Bob. That was very informative. We are also joined by Catherine Franco from the Buffalo Niagara Partnership. And Ms. Franco can talk a lot about how a public bank can really connect with the underserved and how many of these communities are really, they're not banked communities. So I will turn it over to Ms. Franco to give a discussion about how public banks can really help community economic development.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So I know that there are so many others on this call that really can speak to a lot of the work in terms of what public banking can do. I am no expert. What I will say is that I am really passionate, and one of the things that public banking really is a draw for me and some of the work that I do here in Buffalo is really in the way that we've been able to see grassroots organizations kind of come and do this work, really rally behind public banking, and the idea that we can take, particularly on the municipal level, that we can take taxpayer funds and take them out of big banks where they play with it on Wall Street, extract from our communities, particularly low to moderate income communities, particularly our Black and brown communities, and that we can have that money and reinvest it right back into how we want to see that happen, that we can see equity when it comes to racial and economic justice. I think that that's really the big pull for me when I think about public banking and what it can do across New York State in cities and towns alike. So that's really huge. And I guess part of what the draw is for that is, when we think about what banks do, where the interests lie, folks have already talked here about banks are looking to benefit their shareholders and that sort of thing. When we have public banking and we're really having public funds for public good, we don't necessarily have to be thinking about issues around redlining that still happens to this day. So when we talk about, again, looking at racial and economic justice and trying to provide some equity, I also have to say that I would be remiss. I'm happy that I'm able to talk today, but I would be remiss if I didn't again talk about the groups that are doing this work. So Public Bank NYC, that we have a Public Bank Coalition in Rochester, that this is really kind of a statewide effort to get public banking in our municipalities. There's a statewide coalition, Equity Agenda, that is doing a lot of this work. So making sure that it's not just happening kind of on the policy level, but also really that we're getting people on the ground excited to understand what public banking can do for us, what community reinvestment looks like through the eyes of the residents in these cities, and how that can transform, not just necessarily in infrastructure and parks, but really how we can make municipal funds, our taxpayer money, go further for us. And then I know that there's more time, and again, there's other people who can speak to this better, so I wanna give time over to those folks.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine. We are also joined by Dr. Wallace Ford, who is the associate professor at Medgar Evers College and a former head of the State of New York Mortgage Association, who can speak to this as well. So, Professor Ford.
Sure, thank you very much, and good evening to all. And Mr. Hardmeyer, welcome to New York, kind of. And thank you very much for your presentation. I just my thinking, and it really kind of follows up on what Ms. Franco was just mentioning, and it may sound like we planned this, but it's just that the issue is just so compelling. One of the concerns that, and again, when I was president of the State of New York Mortgage Agency, and also heading up New York State's Minority Business Program, and then New York City's Minority Business Program, has to do with the lack of access to capital, particularly in the Black community. And it is something that, and in working with Senator Sanders and his staff, we obviously tried to focus upon. It's not obviously not just the Black community, but historically and systemically, the Black community in any type of initiative winds up being in the lesser mode. My question for you, Mr. Hardmeyer, I know there's not a large Black community in North Dakota, but I would imagine the largest non-white community would be the indigenous people who live in North Dakota and who are always living in what's now North Dakota. And the question that I would have is, are there any special, targeted, but I don't want to say special, any targeted initiatives that the Bank of North Dakota has been able to develop to provide some focus there, because that might give us some guidance as to how a public bank here in New York State could perhaps follow best practices that you've adopted over these many years.
Well, thank you for that question. Yeah, over the years, we have developed programs that were, encouraging, our Native American reservations to take advantage of economic development programs. And really what we found is a opportunity of North Dakota businesses who are looking for labor. The reservations are, suffer a lot of problems with unemployment. There's health problems that you would have seen on many of the reservations around the country. All of those have plagued North Dakota as well. But where we have worked is to develop programs that encourage businesses to work 1v1 with the Native American populations to access employment opportunities. We have lent, many times to the tribes themselves for manufacturing facilities, manufacturing opportunities. And I would say that it's not so much a singular effort to work on the reservations, but more of a statewide attempt to bring us all up rather than just segments of our population. But again, we found that, it's economic development is all locally driven. We can put the programs out there, but there has to be local initiative. And that's what we've done. So we've worked separately trying to get liquidity onto the reservations. We have found that they still continue to be underbanked and underserved, and are willing to work with CDFIs or whatever the nature of that lending entity might be to provide our credit where we can do the most good. So to answer your question specifically, is there a targeted program to help minority and Native American populations? The simple answer has been there has been, but today it's more of a statewide effort to help the state as a whole.
Ms. Donovan, I just have a follow-up question, very brief one, which is, in another life, I worked as an investment banker and worked actually with the Navajo Nation for a couple of years, which of course is one of the largest in the country, and its asset base is a lot larger than many that you might find in North Dakota. But what I was hearing you mention has to do with employment and consumer issues. But on the business development issues, is that something that you've been, obviously in some ways, the indigenous people would have to initiate that, but is there some way that you might be able to, the Bank of North Dakota might be able to encourage that? Again, I'm asking the question not just with respect to North Dakota perspective, of course, but how, when we will have a public bank in New York sooner than later, how that bank could follow your best practices.
Well, yeah, it's a complicated issue. Lending on the reservation is, takes a little bit of a unique experience to do that. Many of them, of course, have their own sovereign immunity. What we've really asked for of the Native American community is to adopt, the commercial uniform code, so that lending practices can be done on a basis that are fair and equitable across. And so, that is one of the issues. I've been president of the Native American Task Force, part of the Banking Association, to really work hard to develop more liquidity, more programs on the reservations. And it really starts with, understanding the unique needs, getting, some adaptation of the Uniform Commercial Code so that banks can understand, the lending methodology in which they're going to work on reservations. And that, I think, has been the largest single barrier to liquidity on the reservations, is really the adoption of the Uniform Commercial Code. And once that happens, I think capital goes to where there's a return, and you will see opportunities arise on reservations. I've dealt with it for 35 years, trying to work diligently to make that available. But it's not easy. I'll just freely admit that. More can be done, more should be done. And it's a problem that needs to be solved.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I just want to commend Dr. Ford for his excellent question. We really look forward to working with you. This is the quality that we are putting together in this statewide initiative, from the grassroots up, from the academia. All of these efforts are coming together. There are many people who have worked on this. There's no one group that has taken this. This is many streams coming together, and we're working well together. And I will yield now and let True Blue New York. Who can argue with that title?
Thank you, Senator Sanders. I appreciate the time. I'm Judith Hertzberg, a grassroots activist and co-leader of True Blue New York, which is an organization committed to protecting the rights of all New Yorkers by working for the passage of laws and electing legislators that support progressive values. Enacting legislation to make public banking possible clearly supports that commitment. Municipal public banks in particular, and I realize we're talking about both municipal and state public banks, but municipal public banks are an excellent pathway to provide capital and funding in communities where such capital and investment is scarce, limited, and expensive. A public bank should and can be focused on economic development and investment in local communities, partnering with both local institutions and groups. Projects can and should, for example, be housing, building the supply of both rental and for-purchase residences, infrastructure, and funding for small and medium business development and growth. A municipal public bank's access to public fund deposits allows it to obtain funds to on-lend or invest at lower rates than commercial banks and other for-profit financial institutions. And I think that this is key in New York, where we are home to all the money center banks and many, many other kinds of for-profit financial institutions. A public bank won't be beholden to shareholders and have to worry about generating a dividend. It could be run at substantially lower costs than a corporate or retail bank or other for-profit financial institutions. So True Blue heartily endorses advancing this legislation, seeing a municipal and a state public bank come to fruition. A public bank's mission is one that True Blue New York heartily embraces. Thank you.
So much, Judith. I'm now going to turn it over to our co-host, Dr. Amara Inya, who is on the advisory board of the Public Bank Institute and has a lot of expertise in this field, and she will open the floor for open discussion. So, Doctor, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you for the wonderful questions that we've had so far, as well as just the really informative presentations that I'm sure will be educating people who tune in both to this call and watch the recording of this video. One of the questions that's come in that I think is pertinent to this discussion is, could a union meet their banking needs with a public bank? for example, if they wanted to divest from a Wall Street bank. I guess a similar question was, does the Bank of North Dakota have access to the retirement funds of state unions?
The way I started this is that what works for North Dakota may be different for other states. And so, if there's a place for, the unions in New York's state banking model, I would say that's certainly a call that each state would make on its own. So, we don't, although we have the only public banking model in the country, certainly I think what's going to come out of this are many different types of applications of this model. So what may be right for North Dakota may not be right for New York and vice versa. So, I think that would be something that each state has to wrestle with on their own, what they want it to be. In terms of accessing, pension funds, no, we do not. We do not have readily access to the state pension funds, although the Bank of North Dakota has in years past administered certain parts of their fixed income portfolio where we've managed that for them. In one case, I will tell you that the state of North Dakota has put together what is called the Legacy Fund. And that is, today, the state of North Dakota receives 10% of all revenue, oil taxes that are collected come to the state of North Dakota. That is collected by the Legacy Fund. Today, that's about an $8 billion fund. When that started, all of those monies were deposited at the Bank of North Dakota. And so we quickly outstripped our ability to handle a deposit of that size. But most of those funds, the legacy funds, the state pension funds, are managed by, professionals outside of the state. And it is an area of, I guess, quite a bit of discussion in terms of, just as you've brought up, why are all those fees being paid to out-of-state, hedge funds, pension funds, professional managers, when North Dakotans could manage some of those funds just as well. So it is an area that we are discussing as a state today.
Thank you so much for that response. Roger Meadows, you had a question.
Yeah, I guess this is more for the senator. Under Section 266 of both the Assembly and Senate bill, I think the public is seriously underrepresented on the 11-panel member advisory board, where there's only 2 representing the public interest regarding social justice and consumer advocacy. Can we increment that by 3, making it 5, increasing the leverage of the public interest in the everyday decision-making process?
Well, I'm open to talk some more on it, and I encourage you to meet with me. We're very leery of changing a bill at this point. We've brought it this far. However, yours is a good point. So why don't we speak offline and let me get more information about what you're trying to do.
Oh, thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Senator Sanders, for your responsiveness. That is definitely commendable. And Mr. Meadows, excellent question. There was another question that I think as we kind of wrap this up, to Walt McCree, there's a question about the relationship between a public bank, whether state or municipal, and local community banks. It comes up a lot in the town halls we do and in the conversations we have, where people are really wanting to understand what is the relationship between the public bank and the local banks. Is it synergistic? Is it competitive? So Walt, if you could speak to that question.
Well, Eric has been very clear about the way the Bank of North Dakota works and the whole ecosystem of giving credit with the public banks and working in support and collaboration with community banks. Because we're making up kind of new models of what public banks will look like, We think the BND model, it makes a lot of sense because local lenders are really important to the economic ecosphere of business. But because, as was indicated before, because small banks are going away, community banks are disappearing, we think the public bank in the space would be able to revive some of those businesses, that a public bank would be able to, as part of its portfolio, build lines of lending that it could share risk and move capital assets through the community banks. Which builds their business. I think one of the other stats that Eric referred to was that there are more community banks in North Dakota per capita than anywhere in the state. Well, they also happen to be more profitable on average than most of the community banks around the country, in part because of that synergy that is there. So, banking is an art. It's a profession. It's a business. We want it to be a utility for all the good reasons that have been spoken of before, but it's not a charity. A lot of the issues that have been brought forward and that are all over the country, they're all the same: affordable housing, small business lending. I mean, the whole thing. The people are in need, as the farmers in North Dakota were, and the private capital markets are not serving us. So obviously, we need that new institutional framework to work for ourselves. So I think that what we're finding around the country is that municipal banks and state banks are going to be emerging on similar tracks, but we will be one who support the collaboration between the business of banking and the public banks, so that existing network, what is left of it, can be revived and supported. We just think that's architecturally kind of a necessary way to go. Yeah, so that kind of answers that, I hope. Well, not all municipalities are going to be able to have a bank, and you just have to have a certain amount of scale to be able to make the numbers work. States, of course, states really have enough deposit basis and resources. Cities, large cities, the ones like Philadelphia and San Francisco, who this week have presented new bills for public banks. But San Diego, Oakland, Los Angeles, Seattle, they're kind of all over the country have been involved in looking at municipal public banks. But we don't have a model for that in the country. So that's one of the things that's going to be emerging in our work together in building a new public banking horizon, a landscape. But scale is really important. I mean, a small community just probably can't have a bank. Now, what we've seen is that, for example, Pomona County in California Pomona is working with Los Angeles, looking at creating a regional sort of entity, joint power authority, perhaps. In Washington State, a bill discussed actually today in the Washington legislature, a bill to allow municipalities to combine their interest in infrastructure lending. So that bill approaches it in a little bit different way, where the municipalities themselves, without banks, at least can sign up to be partners or stakeholders or equity holders in a state infrastructure bank. So, we can make up a lot of variations of this. And I want to speak to another point here. Professor Ford was talking about the tribe investments, Native American investment. PBI is now starting to, we have a couple of our colleagues are working directly in that as well. And we're pretty excited that the Native Americans are, that certain tribal areas are able and have the resources and the business focus, which is what Eric also said, you really have to have a regimen of business thinking to take the next steps toward building banks for themselves. Now, we think that there are other community targets. Black and brown banks also, could use this matrix. But again, we're making this up, all of us, as we go along, and having collaboration with banking professionals. We think it's going to be really, really important. And as you heard me say, we prioritize the importance of community banks. Eric, I did want to ask you a question. Here in New Jersey, the big pushback is that the State Banking Association, all the bankers said, we're against it. we're going to lose our municipal deposits, even though we told them that it's not in the bill. But that is one thing. In North Dakota, despite the being flush with deposits, our municipal deposits shunted into local banks.
Walt, that's a great question and a good point to make. I was in New Jersey a couple years ago and spoke to the New Jersey Bankers Association. It was not well received by the banking association. They were polite and cordial, but I knew, up front that I was in hostile territory. And it largely was around that particular area of municipal deposits. When the Bank of North Dakota was created 100 years ago, all municipal deposits and state deposits were legally required to be deposited at the bank. In the early 1930s, an initiated measure was passed that eliminated the requirement of political subdivisions to have to deposit their monies at the bank. And so, the New Jersey bankers were really upset about that particular issue. And I said, well, look, that's not how it works in North Dakota. We're not after the municipal deposits. We know that's a big source of income for community banks for deposits. We're just not simply going there. We have enough with the state deposits. So it was a point of great contention with the New Jersey Bankers Association.
Yeah, and I would just add that the writ in the law does not include the municipal deposits right off the top with it, because we don't want to alienate that. And I'm talking about the governor's office is saying we're not going to take your deposits that way. Yeah. I do want to just acknowledge A.C. Townley and the Nonpartisan League from 1913 and make a metaphor, an analogy to where we are all now. And that is that when they took over the government in North Dakota, and first of all did the mill and granary, the mill and elevator, the bank was kind of an afterthought, wasn't it? It was, but it became a legacy institution from which they built this very powerful environment. This is what each one of us, I think, on this call is doing, and a shout out to all of our partners in the local groups, the local public banking groups around the state, Rochester, Buffalo, New York City, and so forth, as we work on this together. This is a democracy rising moment, and that's really what A.C. Townley, I think, was speaking to as well. They actually started a group called the $6 Suckers, if I have that right. $6 was a lot of money, but these were people who put in a fair amount of chit to support that nonpartisan league fight around the state, and they did the circuit and so forth. Well, we're all at that point now. We all need each other to stand in all of our respective silos, to stand around the simple fact is that we all need money to get our public policies to work, to serve the issues and the needs that have been mentioned in this gathering tonight, and that we all see, whether it's affordable housing or small business lending. This is work that needs to be done. We can't count on our private capital brethren to do it for us. So we all need to stand together, and I'm just really excited to see so many of you, and we at PBI are here to help you any way we can.
Thank you so much, Walt. And I want to underscore the fact that this is a collaborative effort, that we're here to support these efforts in states across the country. And also what you've gotten from a lot of the comments is that we have the ability to actually craft this in a way that makes sense, that rises to the challenges of this moment. So while we have the privilege of being able to speak with President Hardmeyer in person about the experiences and his knowledge and expertise from North Dakota, and you have folks who are parts of coalitions from across the state. But one thing is that it really does become what we make it. And so we have the ability to really craft, whether it's at the state level, a public bank, or the municipal level, to really craft a system that meets the challenges of this moment, but also one that is aligned with the values of the kind of society that we want to build. And that is more evident now than it's been in the past. As we've seen with COVID, it has really simply unearthed or brought to light issues that are longstanding, inequities that are longstanding, communities that have been marginalized. It really has just exposed those in a way where we cannot ignore them. So I want to defer to Senator Sanders, as I know we have limited time, but I wanted to underscore what Walt is saying about the Public Banking Institute being just really in the trenches in this work and willing to support and assist these efforts throughout the state of New York and elsewhere around the country. That's what we are here to do. And obviously there are a lot of questions that we could not get to in this town hall, but that just means that there's a need for more spaces to have these conversations and to make sure that we get those questions answered. And of course, we're willing to help with that. So with that said, Senator Sanders.
Well, I want to thank you for being such a gracious co-host, and forget co-host, you really did it. And I'm grateful for that. In a moment, I'm going to let my co-chair have the last word. He is the new co-chair of banking. I will say that I want everybody to be involved, not just come out of your silo, join some other groups that are up here. Don't just stay in your group, get to another. You've got several. So my friends, in order for us to win, we're going to have to come out of our silos, and yet we're going to have to get to the grassroots. They won in North Dakota because they went to the grassroots. They got everyday people riled up, and they took back some of their democracy. We will have to do that to move forward. The groups that have done this work have done tremendous work, and they have brought it to this level. But to get to the next level, we're going to have to get everyday people on the block, or on the farm, or wherever we find them, to come together and say, you know what, we're gonna make this work, and it's going to be a multi-racial, multi-class initiative, like this phone call, like this Zoom today. You know, we've been speaking in each in our little silos, but to get to the next step, we must join hands and move forward. I'm very grateful to have worked with all of these folk. That if I start naming names, I'm already in trouble, because all of you are such fantastic people. And you really, what little I know of this, it's because you have educated me, and I appreciate that. I will stop. I want to thank my staff for doing a lot of the work to making sure that we are out here and hosting and all the rest of that good stuff. So thank you very much for that. My co-chair of the assembly actually is the chair of banking. Are you here, Mr. Chair?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you so very much to you and your staff, to President Hardmeyer, to everybody that's on this call who was able to make this happen. This was incredibly informative. I know that many folks who joined us through the live stream want to stay engaged, want to stay involved in this very important issue. Stay engaged with our offices, stay engaged with our staff. And again, I want to thank the staff both on the senator's side as well as my side for helping and organizing this event. But more importantly, we just want to emphasize, this is the first of many conversations that we need to have around this issue. And I know myself and many of my colleagues in the Assembly majority will continue to fight to make sure that all communities across the state have access to financial instruments that have been deprived by our communities. But also, more importantly, that we stay in touch, we stay involved, and we keep working until the job is done. And again, I'll leave it at that. And Senator, thank you so very much for your leadership on this issue as well.
You're more than welcome. To the different groups that have done this, we have heard you. We in the state Senate and state assembly, we have heard you. Your silent cries are now very loud, and we're going to join with you. Continue to educate us. Continue, just as I'm going to meet that gentleman who was speaking, there's ways of making it better. You need to get to us and struggle with us so that we can make it the best that we can. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all. Everybody take care. God bless you all. Bye-bye.